Chapter 6 Tracks and Ties. In the crenellated bell tower above the church in Vermont, overlooking a town that had been burned to the ground, leaving only piles of snow-covered brick and ash, where a community thrived just a few years prior, Adam Gillet, in the body of a dead German boy whose birth name was Matthias, saw the dull blue gleam of Francois's approaching cutlass in the flashlight's beams. Adam half smiled. "I see you still have your cutlass," he said. Francois paused, halfway between Caitlin and Matthias Nilsson's corpse. "You are not, Adam," Francois said, though he was nowhere near as certain as he sounded. Adam laughed gently and looked at his hands. He did not need a looking glass to tell him this was a different body than the one he left behind. But he knew for certain he remained connected to the Adam he had lived as for 29 years. "Oui, I know. But I told you all of our story last night. How would I know those things if I was not?" "Devilry," said Francois. I've seen a few of those since I awoke. That is certain. And maybe a couple while I slept. And perhaps I am become one myself." He thought of the old woman serving him petit déjeuner, and his hands trembled a little. Despite her smile and efforts to please, the fear she stoked burned coal-hot in his guts. He recalled awakening in the burning sands, just as all who had gone before him. He felt hot breath hitting his cheek and opened his eyes to see the she-wolf's muzzle and the white spikes of her canines, millimeters from his face. His last memory from life was machine gun fire, lighting up the night from its hidden nest. He did not hear the bullets, just saw the muzzle flashing and felt the dull impacts as lead punched through the center of his being. A flash of pain, a roaring in his ears, then silence as his body began to fall, organs eviscerated. He felt nothing but by the time his body landed in the muddy crater of water and splashed into its slime, coming to rest on shell splinters that stuck up like jagged teeth from its bottom. His lungs filled with water and blood. He sunk down and stayed. Even as the corpse bloated and tries to raise him up, the shell's sharp shrapnel kept him submerged, pinned to the earth. Eventually the skin slipped off his bones, the organs dissolved to mush, and what was once beautiful Adam Gillet rotted to mud and soil. And then the desert sun awoke him. He heard the she-wolf growl, thunder in her chest, then a sharp yank on her leash pulled her back. The little boy contemplated the Frenchman before him. "Come and see," said the little boy. Adam sat up and stood. He followed the grimy little boy through the desert to the roadhouse. They passed by the Ford Model A, parked askew by the front stoop. Adam tried to look through the dusty windows, but whoever sat behind the wheel was invisible through the fine dirt and grit that was stuck to it. The mood inside the roadhouse itself was subdued. In a booth near the counter bar, a fat man sat across from a young man wearing a German uniform. Adolf Hitler's eyes were bound with bright, clean, white cotton bandages. He held a light blue pamphlet tightly in shaking hands, as if holding fast to it was the only thing that kept him tethered. Adam heard the fat man say, "Kill 'em both. Kill 'em both dead. You understand?" In German. "Yes, Papa, yes. You would be so proud of me," blind Adolf replied. The little boy led Adam to a seat at the counter. The old woman behind it smiled, but it only reached her teeth. Bon matin, Monsieur Gillet. You just in time for breakfast, she said. Then she fed him and told the story of his father's death. She laid out the case against Francois and Unique so plainly that Adam felt as if he had been in his father's tent when Francois cut him down, beheaded him with a Portuguese cutlass, then slipped into the night unseen, revenged, but no less empty than he had been before. "What do you think about that?" said the old woman. Adam was silent. She set a cup of coffee before him. "Drink your coffee. It'll give you the gumption you need to carry on. I'm about to give you a gift, Monsieur Gillet. The gift of vengeance for your father's murder. Most people would kill for that chance. I hope you will too." Ha! Adam stared at the dark coffee, black with a shimmer of brown to it. It recalled the precise shade of Francois's skin. She set a saucer of cream beside the coffee. "You want to lighten that up?" she asked. Adam shook his head. "No. It is perfect as it is." He lifted the cup and sipped the sharp brew. "Your breakfast is almost ready." Adam, in the handsome body he remembered so well, sat at the counter subdued. His mind was still muddled from the oppressive, stifling heat in the desert outside. He gazed through the front windows at the stark landscape, with the sun blasting down onto it, merciless. The white sand could have easily been mistaken for a frozen tundra, had the heat not been beyond any Adam had ever encountered, even in Senegal's midsummer, in the heart of the savannah. It had been brutal, sweat through and spent, overseeing black men, laying out wooden sleeper beams and ties, sparking dead wood into the soil with sledgehammers, hauling 5-meter-long, burning hot steel rails, and joining them with thick bolts, ratcheting them to steel fish plates, then repeating the arduous task again and again. He thought then that the men under his charge were laboring in hell on earth. He was not wrong. But the heat of the desert outside the diner bested that experience. The old woman set down a glass of water before him. She smiled. "I'll just leave the pitcher, honey. You look like you could use every drop of it and then some." She turned to the stove, and the 3 eggs bubbling in the griddle's oil. Adam drank the water. He folded his hands on the counter and rested his head on top of them. When he awoke, he nearly went mad. He was at the bottom of the canal in the Riekval tunnel in Matthias Nilsson's corpse. He kicked his way to the surface and coughed all the muck and water from his lungs. Then he fumbled along through the pitch-black canal until he reached the exit. He walked for several hours, caught in a madness that was reflected by the violent rainstorm engulfing the land. It was as if the meal in the roadhouse brought forth a rabid nature that had been sitting just below the genteel, civilized surface of Adam Gillet. The old woman had not caused the insanity in him. She had revealed it. When he found 2 German survivors hiding in a blockhouse, he killed them both without a moment's hesitation. In the woods, he came across the party carrying Isaiah Taylor, and just as Ganan soon would, he recognized them as brothers in arms. At the train depot, he found Francois's trail. Matthias's cold heart began pounding in Adam's chest. He followed in Francois's footsteps to the very church that only remained standing because Matthias's faltering, superstitious hand failed to press the demolition plunger. A foolish notion. A church was no less holy than anything else humanity was laying certain waste to. Regardless, the haven still stood, and Adam knew that the man who had murdered his father was hidden in it. He walked through the transept, past the cold altar, and climbed the stairs in the bell tower, until only the trapdoor stood between him and his prize. But when the moment came, when he had Francois cornered in the tower, when he might have walked outside and triggered the demolition with the explosives the men who were sent to finish Matthias's job had already placed, he did not. In recalling his journey with Francois, he accidentally touched his own vanishing humanity, and he could not force himself to finish the act he had been sent to commit. And now, in the Vermond church bell tower, Adam stared up through Matthias's eyes at Francois' scarred face. He recalled the first time he'd seen him in Dakar, and the revulsion he felt at the ritual cuts Francois' people believed made them demon-proof. He remembered the African heat on the savannah, broiling him on their first mission beyond the garrison at Tambacounda. Sitting in the shade of his tent's flaps gave little in the way of relief. The humid Senegalese air was an invisible hot wool blanket, cooking him from the inside out. Adam imagined his sweat boiling inside him and bubbling up out of his skin to parboil him. He unbuttoned the top of his uniform blouse, trying to let the heat escape, but the air seemed too thick to fight its way out of his collar. The monsoon would come soon. As miserable as the rains were, at least the sun would not add to his misery then. The rhythmic clank-bang of railroad spikes being hammered into fresh ties echoed dully across and through the steel rails, telling him they were nearly done with the repairs. A month passed. A train had come from Dakar on these tracks, heading east to the Mali River. There it would fill its cars with plunder from French Sudan, intending to haul the treasure to the coast for shipment home to France. But 3/4 of the way to the Mali River, the locomotive cut straight through a herd of cattle who had wandered aimlessly onto the rails. When the train halted, the cattle shepherds pulled the train engineer from his seat and beat him bloody for the loss of half their herd. After the train pulled away, word of the cattle killing spread, and before the train completed its journey east, the offending railroad tracks had been dismantled, the rails dragged away, the wooden ties burned in pyres. On the return trip, when the treasure-laden train reached the stretch of ruined track, it barely stopped in time. They raced back toward the Mali River in reverse until they reached the next station in the line. They swapped the caboose and engine, then returned to French Sudan, terrified the entire way that they were about to be ambushed and looted. Word tapped desperately through the telegraph wires to distant Dakar. In short order, Captain Adam Gillet was dispatched on a train with workmen and 2 sections of Spahi African soldiers to oversee restoration of the Republic's railroad tracks. They had been at it for 3 miserable days when things went south. Adam looked up from inspecting the freshly laid tracks as a man approached, moving slow and easy in the heat. Sergeant Francois Anunique's crisp salute was at odds with the tribal scars on his cheeks. The grace and ease with which the big black man carried himself made Adam feel more like a barbarian than a refined Frenchman in his presence. Capitaine. Adam returned the salute. Good morning. We are being watched, Francois said. Adam took that in. He nodded. He stepped back into his tent and returned with his pistol belt and field glasses. Show me. Francois led Adam through the camp to the armored train's locomotive compartment. They climbed up into the shade of the cabin. Francois pointed out the right side, due south, perhaps 500 meters, in the tall grass. Adam glassed the field slowly. It took a long moment to find the black men hidden in the thicket. Ah, yes, I see them. What do you think? Perhaps the men who lost their cattle and destroyed the track, worried we have come to hang them. Or scouts. Scouts. For a raiding party. Adam looked back through the binoculars. Merde. They have gone. Adam chewed his lip for a moment. Let's head out and give the area a sweep, see if any more of the buggers are out there. Adam and Francois walked a long, cautious circuit around the camp. The ring of hammer-on-rail spark continued to sing out as the tribe of men laying track dragged timber ties and steel rails from the nearly empty train car's flatbed onto the way, then secured them to the earth. I think we'll have the tracks joined by midday tomorrow, Francois said. Oui, Adam replied, if all goes to plan. They completed the perimeter check and found no sign of hostiles. Adam breathed easier. If the men in the brush were simply shepherds worried the French imperialists had come to crush them under their boot heels, they need not be concerned. Any retribution the shepherds faced for the destruction of the tracks would come from their local chieftains, who were soon to be brutally taxed for the damage to the railway. It was noon when Adam and Francois found out it was something else entirely. The three riders wore loose flowing robes crisscrossed with bandoliers of ammunition for single-shot Snyder Enfield rifles. At their hips were curved cutlasses and daggers. 50 yards from the railway encampment, they reined in their horses and waited for a parley. Adam and Francois walked out to meet them. They stopped a respectful distance away. Francois spoke first. God's peace be upon you. And also on you, replied the man on the right. The big man in the middle watched it all, impassive. He looked at Adam, then passed him to the train engine and the workers, who had slowed their efforts and were watching the goings-on, while trying to appear still engrossed in the rail laying. Men with more power than they had were making decisions that might impact their lives in profound ways. What is the matter with your train? Asked the man. The tracks have been destroyed. We are making repairs, Francois replied. Your boss, he does not speak Wolof, asked the man. No, only French. I will make any translation necessary for him. What can we do for you? Francois asked. You can do nothing. But your boss, he can. Tell him. Francois nodded. Of course. Among your slaves are two of ours. They have run away, the man said. Francois translated to Adam. Tell him that the Europeans have outlawed slavery, as he should know. And we have no slaves. These are all free men being paid for their labor, Adam said. After Francois translated, the big man in the center laughed. His voice rumbled out rivaling Francois' own deep bass. Tell him that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. These men dragging steel and wood in the heat, wasting their bodies in sweat and labor, trading this day and the day after, hundreds of days at the tail end of their lives. For what? For gold. For paper. And with that paper, they will trade for scraps of food and miserable shelter, and they will rise tomorrow in misery and do it again until their bodies are broken and of no more use to their masters. Then their masters will take the broken men's children, put them to the same chore. That is not slavery. I do not know what is. The big man continued, and I see those scars on your cheeks and that Portuguese cutlass at your side, brother. How many black bodies did your father's father's father trade for their blade, I wonder? Back when the Europeans made their money from only our bodies and not our lands. Francois translated all but the last bit, which seemed targeted at his ears only. Adam took it in. He had never quite thought of it that way. You tell him that his argument may have merit, but I am not the arbiter of societal debate. If 2 of his men are among ours, and they are indeed slaves, I cannot, by rule of French law, return them to him. It would be sanctioning slavery, and I cannot do that. If he has a complaint, he must petition the local magistrate and let the court settle the matter. The big man listened to Francois' translation. He looked past them again at the men slaving on the tracks. His laugh was harsh and humorless. Oh, the magistrate. Yes, of course. That seems an excellent course of action. Putting ourselves in the hands of Europeans has always been the wisest of choices. Francois translated. He did not express the irony that dripped from the big man when he said it, but Adam felt the disdain. The big man turned his horse. Farewell, sir, said Francois. God be with you until we meet again, replied the big man as he led his men away. Adam and Francois watched them go until they disappeared from view. What do you think? Asked Adam. I think it's best that we finish laying this track and turn for Dakar as soon as possible. How many men might he have out there? Asked Adam. As many as 200 if he's the local lord, but only if he has them all assembled. Adam worried his lower lip. His 20 unhorsed Spahi soldiers paled and compared to a mounted unit of that size. What are the odds they are already assembled? If he is clever, he mustered them before he made himself known to us. He seems quite clever, Adam replied. Francois nodded agreement. We can have the track finished by tomorrow if we push hard. We can be safe in French Sudan by tomorrow night. Or we can stop work now and ride the train in reverse for a day or so until we can swap out the locomotive and return to Dakar. The governor will not be pleased if we come back to Dakar with our tails between our legs, said Adam. Francois laughed. Will he be pleased if we are killed out here? Adam's smile was rueful, not necessarily displeased, perhaps dismayed. We don't hold nearly as much value to him as this railway does. And then perhaps we are indeed slaves, Francois replied. By that chieftain's logic, we are all slaves to someone, lash or no. It would make for an interesting philosophical debate, but I don't think debate is what he has in mind. Do you think 2 of his slaves have hidden amongst our men? Perhaps it is simply pretext for him, but it would not be impossible. Adam sighed. Ah, merde. Well, let's find out for certain. Have the foreman do a head count. We'll press on with rails as fast as we can, hopeful that he still must marshal his forces. With a bit of luck, we can be gone before they attempt anything rash. Francois nodded. They walked back to the railway. On close inspection, the foreman found the pair of runaways. They were terrified Adam would turn them over, and he considered it long and hard, but put off any concrete decision for the time being, holding on to hope that it was a moot point. While Adam, the foreman, pushed the pace with the railway gang, Francois put the other Spahis on alert. They did a handful of patrols looping out into the bush. There was no indication of the big man and his companions. As sunset neared, Adam and Francois set sentries around the camp and ordered all the workers' canvas tents circled up around the locomotive. He and Francois did one last long circuit of the perimeter and found nothing. As the umbrella of bright stars began to take hold of the night sky, they returned to camp and settled in.